What happens after Groundhog Day? Theresa May meets Merkel and Macron again. Is this the beginning of the thaw? Tonight, can the PM break the Brussels deadlock? We're live outside Theresa May's showdown supper.
I'm here in Brussels, where Theresa May is telling EU leaders she is listening to their concerns over Brexit. I'll tell you how her message is going down.
We'll discuss where we are with negotiations and where we're going. And remember this?
Got the mortgage from the union?
Yeah.
Did you pay it off? Did you pay off your mortgage?
Mine was in a financial agreement which was in 2 years.
Yes, go
that
on.
the mortgage was settled in 2007 between the trustee.
It turns out he didn't. Now we learn the chair of the Labour Party got a lot more from the miners' union he used to run. And calls for FA bosses to take responsibility for the latest scandal or quit their jobs. We speak to Stan Collymore and others about racism and sexism in English football. Hello, good evening. They told us it would all be about tone tonight, and as Theresa May makes her post-supper speech, some of those in Europe might sense there is something in the air. The PM will tell leaders in the next hour or so that firm progress is being made in the discussions on citizens' rights and on Northern Ireland's border. And she'll insist the UK's future relationship with the EU could be a close economic partnership, one that could be optimistic and ambitious. This time last week, you'll remember, Michel Barnier was talking of deadlock in no uncertain terms. Mrs May will hope that her time spent in Brussels at the beginning and end of the week might spell a new commitment to working through it. So are we at last beginning to see the tiniest, gentlest of smoke signals emerging on Brexit relations? Nick, what is in Brussels for us tonight? What's the PM about to say, Nick? Do we know?
Well, the dinner is still underway. These dinners do take a long time at European Union summits, but when the Prime Minister does eventually speak, I think EU leaders will find that she's still on a charm offensive, wanting to reach out to them and explaining her Florence speech. And essentially, I think what she's expected to say is, look, I listened to you back in the summer. I listened when you said the Brexit negotiations were in trouble. And I reached out to you and I did two big things. In the first place, I talked about how the UK would be willing to have a transition phase after it leaves. Prime Minister calls it an implementation phase. And the other thing she will expect her to say is, look, I'm willing to make a big commitment on finance, which is essentially to meet the EU budget going up till the end of 2020 for 18 months after the UK leaves the EU. And essentially what the Prime Minister is saying is not that she's been disappointed with the response, because she's being very charming tonight, but she's going to say, I understand you cannot formally declare today that sufficient progress has been made in the divorce areas, but I do say to you, please can we move on so that we have that declaration in sight when the EU leaders meet here again in December.
And when she says, please, can we move on, what will they say?
Well, we did have a very interesting start to the summit today when Theresa May walked into the venue flanked by Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and Angela Merkel, the German chancellor. They were actually talking about Iran. That was that joint European position to counter Donald Trump. And that sort of warm reception was in stark contrast to last year when Theresa May sort of been struggling to find friends at the summit. I think it was last December. So what that shows is that EU leaders do want to reach out. They do want to reach an accommodation with Theresa May. But publicly they are saying one big thing. Prime Minister, you did not go far enough on the finance in Florence, and what you do need to do is give us a commitment and reach a framework for how you will deal with the UK's past liabilities when obviously it was a member state of the European Union. But my feeling is that European leaders want Theresa May to leave this summit tomorrow in a better place than when she arrived today. Angela Merkel talking about how she hopes the talks can move on to the future when they meet again in December. And I was talking to sort of one veteran figure who was saying they sense that there is something in the air. Maybe there will be some sort of language. Maybe the European Union will sort of beef up its preparations for the future trade talks, beef up its preparations for the transition. So if that declaration is made in December, they can get on with it.
Thanks, Nick. If you hear anything more in that speech, we'll come back to you. Joining me now here is Labour's Barry Gardiner, who's just hot-footed it from the Eurostar after meeting Europe's chief negotiator Michel Barnier in Brussels. And from Brighton, the Tory MP Maria Caulfield. You're literally just off the train, Barry. It's an impressive performance to leg it in here. Did you get that sense when Nick talked about something in the air? Did you feel there is a change going on there?
Well, look, I certainly hope so. And we were there today, Jeremy and Keir and myself, really because we want to see these talks succeed. We're 15 months since the referendum. We're 6 months on from the triggering of Article 50, and things have got into a logjam. I think everybody understands that. But it's really important for business because we're coming up to that crunch time in January when businesses will start taking decisions about their supply chains, about their contractors, about their future business relationships, and whether or not they relocate. We saw Blankfein today in terms of Goldman Sachs. There have been others. And it's coming to that critical point where we need to see progress because business needs certainty, and at the moment it doesn't have it.
Just let us be that fly on the wall for a second. You met Michel Barnier. How does he, when he talks to you and Jeremy Corbyn, there's a good relationship apparently with Jeremy Corbyn, they've swapped Arsenal shirts and all the rest of it. What does he say about things? I mean, we heard him stand on the stage and say deadlock. Does he really believe that? Or
look, obviously we're not there negotiating. We are not there doing anything other than to try and make sure that we can get this to move on.
Or was it? Did you sense what he feels is going on now?
My sense of things, and that's all I can give you, because of course this is a private meeting. If we want to have open and free dialogue and to get a better understanding, and we need that as Her Majesty's official opposition, then we have to respect the parameters of that discussion and the privacy of it. But the sense of it is very much that they want to move this on as well, but they do feel that they have to have clarity. And at the moment, they have not got that clarity about those aspects of the budget and those aspects beyond the commitments that have been made with the EU as a member, and they need that spelled out.
It's interesting, isn't it, Mary Caulfield, when you hear Labour sort of getting straight to the hub of things and saying, well, you know, we can see it from the Europeans' point of view and that's what needs to happen next. Do you think we are at that space now where Theresa May's going to give a bit more?
Well, I think Theresa May has set out the stall both in her Lancaster House speech and her Florence speech a few weeks ago, exactly what the negotiating position of the UK is. And this is what happens in negotiations, that the UK puts its stall out, the EU member states put theirs out, and then you negotiate to come to an agreement. And I'm very pleased to hear Barry, at long last, being quite positive about the progress that we're making now in these talks, because it was unfortunate just a few weeks ago when Labour MEPs voted against making any progress.
He's saying he said it's stalled.
And so it's not.
I think what I actually said was that
the news coming out tonight,
had stalled.
that's actually there's progress being made. Well, no, I think there's progress being made, and it's unfortunate that Labour MEPs voted against moving on with progress just a few weeks ago, because that's actually not very constructive. We need to move forward, make these negotiations work, not just for the UK, but for the EU member states as well. And I'm pleased that we seem to be making that progress, and I congratulate the Prime Minister on moving things forward.
Look, I don't think there's any point in actually trying to pretend that things are other than they are. Of course, stalled negotiations. These are negotiations which should by now have been able to move on after the fourth iteration to get to the point where we begin to see the shape of what leave looks like. We're not there. That's why we're at that crisis point. That's why Theresa May made the statement. That's why she rushed to Florence. That's why she is today there
Mary,
at the summit.
This is something your own party agrees with, obviously. We heard Owen Paterson on the radio this morning talking about the letter that he'd sent, welcoming a no deal, saying that actually that's what you've got to prepare for now and you've got to put that on the table. Do you welcome people in your own party going down that route?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you know, you can't go into a negotiation without having a plan B. And, you know, none of us want a no deal. The Prime Minister is actively working towards a good deal for the UK and a good deal for the EU. But you have to be realistic. If there isn't an agreement reached and we get to March 2019, you have to have a plan
Why
B.
didn't you sign
And
the
it would be
letter, just out of
irresponsible
interest?
not to do that.
Were you offered? Did anyone ask you to sign?
I did sign the letter.
The no deal
because
letter.
I do believe that you need a no deal option on the table for two reasons. Firstly, because you might actually not come to an agreement in time, and secondly, you know, to go into a negotiation and not have you know, a fallback position actually weakens your position.
It's wrong
and so
to
I think you need to
pretend
plan
that
for
it
it. That's
isn't
not to
the
say that
European
you want
leaders
it
at
to
some
happen.
point. Let's all push
and
it,
that's
right?
Can I just point out?
I mean,
that the-
Sorry, Mary, just going to give one last thought here.
Can I just point out that normally, of course, in a negotiation, you want the option to be able to say no deal and walk away, because what you're walking away to is the status quo. We've already triggered Article 50. We've already said the status quo is gone, we're leaving the European Union. And therefore, when you say no deal, it's not that you go back to what the situation was before. It's one of the options that you're actually going to be pushed into if you fail to honour the Article 50 rules, which is that you have to negotiate a deal within 2 years. Otherwise, you get pushed out onto World Trade Organization.
I'm so sorry, both. We're out of time. I know that you're going to stay on with us, Barry, because we're doing a Labour story next.